Hello everyone, Assalamu alaikum. In this tutorial, we'll see how to use Riverpod to load data from API and show it on your app like this. So here we'll load data from server and then we'll be able to click on it and go to a new page and come back. So we'll be using Riverpod for HTTP GET request. So let's get started. So here I have created a new project and then I have this main.dart file over here, and inside this I'm going to create a new folder and we'll call it services. Inside this, we want to create HTTP GET request. Now in this folder, we'll create a new file. Now over here, we need to create a class. So let's go ahead and do that. Then we are going to use this endpoint to load data. Now inside this, we want to use HTTP GET request to get data from the server. And for this reason, we'll go ahead and install a plugin. So now right below this cupertine icons, we're going to install two plugins. One is HTTP plugin, that is for HTTP GET request, and this is the Riverpod plugin. And then inside this method, we're going to use the GET method to load data from the server. And for this reason, at the top, we need to import the GET package. Let's go ahead and do it. And at the same time, we need to assign async modifier. We're good to go. And after that, we are going to check our response object. So we'll check the status code. Now here we are checking whether it's 200 or not. If it is not 200, then we are going to throw an error. Now inside this, we are going to decode our data from server. Now we are using JSON decode function, and within the body, we just want to get the data section. Now let's go ahead and view this on a browser, why we want to get the data section. So here you see this is our data, and inside this we have a data field. So within this we just want this amount of data. Okay, anything else we don't want. Okay, so we don't want this pages per page and things like that. Okay, so we're gonna only retrieve ID, email, and first name, last name, and avatar. Okay, and that all resides within this data tag or the data field. Okay, now after getting this data from the server, we save it in a list, but we want to convert it to an object. So that's why we need to create a model. So we'll go ahead and create user model class. Now inside this lib folder, we'll go ahead and create a new directory. And inside this models, we are going to create a new file. Now right inside this Dart file, we are going to create a user model class, and here is our user model class, and it takes ID, email, first name, and last name. This is what we have seen just in our API right over here. So we have ID, email, first name, last name, and avatar. Then this is the default constructor, and after that, because we are getting data from the server in JSON format, so we are passing the JSON data to this constructor, which is called factory constructor, and as we pass the JSON data, it will return us an object. If it returns us an object, then in the UI, we'll be able to access the data like ID, email, first name, last name using the dot operator. Now we'll go back to our services.dart class over here. And inside this, we want to use the user model class and return the data as a list. But of course, we need to go ahead and import the library. And over here, we want to return a future. So that since this is an asynchronous request, so we are returning the user inside this future. And here, of course, we are returning a list because we know eventually this one over here returns a list. Now over here, we want to create a provider object. Now that would be Riverpod Provider. So here we'll do provider. And then inside this, you have to mention the provider type. In our case, this is API service. And over here, we need to pass a function, but the function itself takes a ref object. And inside this, we are going to pass for the function itself, this class, which is at the top, we need to import Riverpod package. Now, after this, we need to save it in a variable. Now the error is gone, but actually we need to understand what is this provider. Now in Riverpod, this provider is the entry point of shared data. why we are using Riverpod? We are using Riverpod to maintain our state, which means that there would be data in our app and we would use the data in different places of our app. So that data would be shared. Whatever we do, all the pages or UI would share the data. Now, Riverpod would help you to create this shared state, which means that Riverpod would hold that data and that data could be shared. If there is changes in your data, Riverpod would let the UI know that, okay, you have changes in your UI, so you have changes in your data or shared state, so let's update the UI. Okay, now for this reason, in general, it takes the type. So in our case, the provider type it is taking is API services, this class. And then over here, this ref is more like a context that is default in Flutter framework, but we are using ref because we are trying to use Riverpod to maintain our state. And then it returns a function over here. It doesn't have to return a function. It could be even a simple text. Like, for example, for this one, we can create a very simple example using, so as you see, these two lines actually pretty much very similar. So over here, once again, we are creating a provider. So the function itself takes a reference and return a string type. So these two are very similar, but in this case, we are returning a class. And at the same time, over here, we are mentioning the type of the class, which is API services. So the idea is if you create a class, and for that class, if you want to maintain state, you need to inject it inside this provider. So this is more like you are injecting the class. Now we'll go ahead and create a new folder. Inside this lib folder over here, we'll do directory, and here we'll. Now inside this class, we have an object of futureProvider. Now this futureProvider once again is coming from Riverpod. Now this futureProvider is useful if you want to create an asynchronous request. For example, over here actually we are doing a network call, right? So data might not be available immediately, even though our provider would hold data, but if there is changes in the data, we would still not be able to know about the new change because this is an asynchronous request. It doesn't happen automatically. It's not like adding two numbers which we get the response immediately inside Flutter app, because it involves here server. So that's why this is asynchronous request. Now in general, if you have asynchronous request and for Flutter Riverpod, you have to do that request. In fact, initially this futureProvider. So over here, as you see, we are referring to this user provider, which is the object, the global object we created early. Anyway, we don't need this. This is the provider or global variable we have created early. But because this is an asynchronous request, so we want to wrap this provider inside futureProvider so that we are able to know when the data is ready to be used. Okay, and over here from this provider we are calling this method. So here provider also means like an instance of this class, but only difference is that you are wrapping it around a provider of Riverpod, which means a shared state. So this data is in shared state, which means it could be shared, and at the same time using this one I can access the methods or the properties, and that's what we are doing here. And another beautiful benefit of this futureProvider is that because this is an asynchronous request, over here you get to use this loading state, error state, and data. So inside this data field, actually we are going to show our data, and as we are loading, which would be showing the icon, and if things go wrong, then would be showing the error message. And this is the beautiful thing about futureProvider. And over here, because we are listening to data, we are observing if we have changes in the data which is coming from network. So that's why we are using ref.watch. Okay, I'm watching this object. Okay, I want to know what happens to you, and this is the meaning of this one. Okay, and whatever happens, I want to get the data. You can do whatever you like. I'm watching. Eventually you have to get me the data. So this is the idea. Now after this, we are ready to show this data in our UI. First, over here we are going to create a stateless class because we are going to use Riverpod, so we don't need to create a stateful class. Now, how to access this provider or this data in shared state from here? For this reason, here we'll replace this stateless widget using consumer widget. Now, once again, consumer widget is coming from Flutter Riverpod, and this is more like a stateful widget actually. So if you click on this and if you come over here, it says that it extends consumer stateful widget, and which eventually extends a stateful widget. Okay, so now we can go back to that our UI over here. Now, of course, we do have a bit of error over here because we need to make some changes. Now, as we are extending consumer widget over here, we need to refer to a Riverpod context. And what is that one? That is called a ref. Okay, now the error should be gone. Earlier I said that the ref object is more like a context, but that context is for Riverpod. Inside this, we want to use this provider, the provider that we created, this one, to access data. And for this reason, here we can use this object, which is called ref, and we could do watch. And inside this, we can use our provider. What is our provider? Our provider is this one right now. So we'll take this one, come over here. Let's import the library. We'll save it to a variable. We'll call it final. Okay, here I have a simple app bar, and after that we are going to do the body. And inside this body, we want to use this data object to get the data. But actually, this data object is very special. It has a callback function, which is when. Okay. Now over here, it has this three properties: data, error, and loading. And as you can see, data should display your data, and if things go wrong during loading, you should show error. And as you are loading, you can show your loading icon over here. Now for loading, we are going to return a simple widget, which is called circular progress indicator. For error property, we are going to return a callback function. If we have error, we will show it in text. Now once again, these three properties all coming from our provider, and if you use provider only, then you have access to them. And how to deal with this one? Now over here, this data take a function, and for the function itself, you have to provide a list. Okay, now how to do that? So over here, we would simply do data, and then over here we would return a function. Actually, we are going to return a widget. For now, we are going to return a column widget. Now we know that this object hold our data as a list. So for this reason over here, we are going to create a new list. So here we do list, and the list type should be user model. Now we'll take this object, which is data, and then this object has a property that is called map. Now we are going to use each element. We are going to access each element using this variable e. So we take each of them, and then eventually we'll return a list for this because we want to draw them in an order in our UI. This variable should hold our information for users, the what we got from the API. Now we'll be able to access them. And for this reason over here, I'm going to return a list view builder. Since this user list is a list, so we would be able to access the underlying properties using a dot operator. So here, that's what we are doing. So we are getting each of them using this indexed, and the underlying properties like first name, last name, and avatar. Okay, great. So this is the time we want to go ahead and run our app. But before that, we need to come to our main.dart. And the first thing, we are going to remove all of this over here. And we already have a my homepage class, which is this one, but we are not passing anything to it. Now we'll simply go ahead and call this one. Okay, now there's another problem. So as we are using Riverpod, every Riverpod application should have, every Riverpod application should have provider scope. Otherwise, you won't be able to use the shared state. So for this reason, I'm going to take this one out over here, and over here I would do provider scope, this one, and it takes a child, and our child is this one, my app. Now we'll go ahead and run our app, and we'll see how it looks. So here is the data from the server. Now we'll do a bit of styling to it. So we're just going to apply a padding to it. Now we'll come to our project over here, and we'll create a new folder, and here we'll call it screens, and inside this we'll create a new file and we'll call it detail screen.dart. So let's go ahead and create a stateless class over here. Now what do you want to have in this class? Now in this class, actually we want to access each of the item. Now for this reason, we'll pass to this class an object. Now that object should be required this.e. It could be anything you name it, but what is this e? So over here we would do e like this, user model. Okay, and we'll call it e. From our home page over here, we'll find a way to send this user model or the object, because we are accessing each of them using this index, right? So we have to create a button for each of them, and then we'll pass this model or object, and then we'll be able to access it over here. And as we do it, now for the body section, we'll have a code like this. Okay, now basically this is pretty much UI over here, but my point is that over here, as we are getting this e, which means our user model, and we'd be able to access the underlying property using this dot operator. Okay, now let's go ahead, come to our my home page. Now over here we'll create a button. So over here we'll create an on tap event, and as you see, on tap event is referring to our detail screen. As you click on this, it will go to detail screen. Now each time you click, it will pass an object. We named it a, it doesn't matter, you can name it anything. So over here we have this user list. Now user list once again is the list. So we take each of them as a model, and then we pass it to our detail screen. Now we are using material page route for click event. Okay, now let's go ahead and run it one more time and we'll see how it looks. So we loaded the data from the server, and we click on this, we go to a new page. Click on this, go to a new page, and that's how you work. So the basic idea with the Riverpod is that first you have to create a service class or any kind of class that is more like a controller, and your class itself should refer to the endpoint, and it should load data. Now using that service class, you have to return a provider, or you have to create a provider, and that should be the entry point of provider in your app. Now as you refer, of course that should be a global variable, and that global variable you'd be using in your futureProvider. Why? Because in our case we are using asynchronous request. Okay, now that asynchronous request should be watching the loaded data using ref.watch method. Okay, some people might do it using ref.read, but ref.watch is recommended. Now in your UI, because your UI wants to use this shared data, so it should extend ConsumerWidget, and at the same time you should use the ref object inside your build method. Okay, and at the same time using that ref object, you take the provider that you have just created, and then you should save it in a variable. Okay, now that variable or object should have one convenient method, actually a few convenient method. One of them is when, and at the same time you'll also have other function like map, and that map function should return you a list, and then you will have a regular list. As you have a list, you can access them in your UI using this index, and of course our list contains an object, so underlying properties of this object we can access them using dot parameter. So yes, that's how you work with the Riverpod.